Hello, everyone. Today we have a special guest, the Maestro Toby Purser from England, from London, who is joining us for this new Dance and Innovation quarantine talk, when he will share with us his reflections. I'm sure we are always very curious how is going on now in England with the current situation with pandemic. He has a well-established and very famous conductor and also a teacher at the Royal Academy of Music in London for the conducting. He will tell us about his life in the last year. Well, just a few words. Toby Purser is a great, wonderful conductor who is also experienced in working with the operas houses and the operas in England, but also outside of England, also in St. Petersburg, also in some operas, also in Paris. And he recently actually won a very prestigious also nomination for the award for the opera of the forgotten work by the great opera composer Britten. And I want to say that, of course, he also made his orchestra, Orion Orchestra, a few years ago, and he's also very much interested in the new music. Thank you very much, Toby. So good to see you. Hello, hi.
Hi, Jakub. It's so great to see you too. And thank you for such a warm introduction. I'm almost blushing.
That's just few words.
I have to correct one very small detail. Actually, I studied conducting at the Royal Academy of Music, but I'm head of conducting at the Royal College of Music, which is on the other side of town.
Oh, wonderful. No, but Toby, tell me, we are very curious. We'd like to hear a few things from you about your life and the current situation in London. So maybe first, let's talk maybe about maybe education. Tell me, how is the teaching system now in London currently?
Well, it's strange. I think the teaching for the students, certainly in conducting, has been as good as it could be in very, very difficult situation. I mean, of course, there's no substitute for conducting an ensemble or an orchestra, whatever it is, or seeing each other in person. But speaking on behalf of my students, I think what they've had, because of the fact that everyone is sitting at home, kind of not doing very much, they've actually had access to lots of very famous conductors who say, yeah, I'm happy to spend a couple of hours talking to the students. So, and aside from the work I've been doing with them and also my fellow professors at the college, they've had people like Anthony Papano, music director of the Royal Opera House, Sir Roger Norrington, talking about musically period performance practice, Jack van Steen, even Bernard Haitink actually in the first lockdown. So they've had access to some amazing inspiration, which maybe wouldn't have been possible in normal times. And I think I see my role in all this with the students as being very much about mentorship and pastoral care, because I think, especially if you're a student who's in London on their own, and some of them do live on their own, and you're not having contact with lots of people, and not just even just a conversation in the cafe, we get so used to it, we take it for granted. And so I set up various online forums. So I set up something called the Conductor's Cafe. So every single day, the Royal College conducting students and the professors all gather and we talk, and we just basically make sure we're all okay. But the conversation is normally really interesting. We've been gathering online and having these conversations and discussions. We now have, I think, like 1,600 conductors across the world who are part of the group. It's on Facebook. So any conductors do join. You're always very, very welcome. So,
is it which platform? Is this Facebook or maybe Zoom?
It's on Facebook.
On the Facebook.
We meet on Zoom. But the group is kind of based on Facebook.
Facebook, okay.
And but I'm trying to give you a more specific answer to your question about education, because we've had sort of 3 lockdowns in the UK.
Okay, so that's interesting.
The first one, and so between them, we were able to get back into the college and actually perform and rehearse. We couldn't have audiences. But we did a number of projects, and I have to say, all of us in an academic institution felt really lucky, because we were about the only people actually making music, because that we were able to, and you don't have the financial risk of, well, I need to sell tickets to to cover the costs. So we were able to make music and do a number of projects, but always with that problem of, well, we are performing with social distancing, and that's difficult. And it's not fun, and I don't think any of us enjoy playing with social distancing, because every member of the orchestra feels very alone. It's hard to hear each other. You know, you can be in a room so big that you can have the first violin next to you. You can hardly see the percussion at the other end of the hall. And so there are so many problems with just literally being able to hear each other. And I did do one project, which was a charity project outside of the college. And that was to do a performance on the stage of English National Opera, which we live streamed for a charity for the homeless called, anyway, the event is called The Night Under the Stars, and the charity is called The Passage, and it helps London's homeless. So we did an online concert for them, and that was really hard because, again, we were on a theatre stage, so the acoustic was as dry as a bone, and everything ended up being sort of 5% slower than I wanted. And that was, again, just because everybody was just kind of just not quite able to hear each other, so sitting back that much further on the beat than they normally would. And yeah, and lots of conductors I've spoken to have said they've had exactly the same experience. So everything takes more time, everything needs more time in order to feel that you can connect to the people around you.
But how about, I have a musical question for you. It also depends on the music that you are conducting, but you have a very precise, maybe triple piano, very, very quiet music, which is even sometimes hard to see in the concert halls, which are amazing concert halls. But when you have social distancing, how you can solve those issues with the triple pianos in this kind of setup?
It's such a good question. I remember the story about Debussy when he premiered La Mer. He wanted a huge number of violins. I don't remember the number, but let's say 20 first violins and 18 second violins, something massive. And they said, "Why, Maestro? Is it for the fortissimo?" He said, "No, it's for the triple piano." And it's the same thing as, and all this, you know, when you're doing social distancing, everything sounds very transparent. It's like you can't, the sound doesn't have any substance. Yeah, it doesn't have, everything is sort of
spread.
Yeah, see-through and gossamer, and it works for some repertoire, of course, but not for everything.
Yes, so then you also, particularly the choice of the repertoire also might be different regarding the current situation. You know, I don't know, actually, honestly, I don't know how it's in England. Where for the conducting lessons, do you have lessons with the pianist, or you have the small orchestras, or maybe like string quartets? So, and how did it change during the pandemic? Because probably you have online teaching. Probably that's what I guess. So if you can tell a few words about that, okay?
It's a mixture of all of those things. So the majority of the teaching is done with piano, or two pianos.
Two pianos, right?
Or with a piano and a quartet, which actually I think is much more useful. But it's a bit more expensive. So so two pianos is the normal. And that's basically where you can workshop technical ideas and really discuss things which you want to discuss without a whole orchestra listening in and making the student feel very exposed. Then we did have, I mentioned these projects with social distancing. Those also involved the conducting students.
Okay. Awesome.
And so very often it was a case of having them prepare the orchestra or take sectional rehearsals. And then because of the nature of these particular projects, I didn't want to turn them into conducting classes. So it was more of a case of making sure we filmed those rehearsals and those sessions and then do video analysis afterwards. And the video analysis we did mostly in person, but sometimes we did it online as well. Just sharing the screen and stopping and starting. But as I said, until quite recently, we were actually able to go into college and work in person. Yes, so long as we had plenty of distance between us, we always wore masks, except for when we were actually conducting. And that was, I know in the States, for example, you have to wear masks when you're conducting as well. Here, you have to wear a mask when you're moving around, but once you're on the podium, you're allowed to take it off, so long as you're...
That's different.
Yeah, and that I have to say, I think is really helpful, because when you see people conducting without a mask on, with a mask on, you realize just how important the face is, the expression, the communication. Otherwise it's very weird, isn't it? When you see people conducting with a mask on,
yes, it is
so dehumanizing.
Yes, teaching, conducting classes. So, and you have, for example, you need to prepare a new repertoire, right? Something or maybe new works, modern works, I don't know. So how do you prepare with them in these conditions?
So on the one hand, I've tried to limit the number of classes I do online by shifting all the classroom time or the ensemble time back later. So it looks like we might be able to go back to college in, let's say, the end of March. In theory, middle of March, but I think it's
I see.
So I'm trying to shift everything, all the projects we would have done from in this term, I'm shifting them back to the summer.
Okay, in this way.
But bringing forward all the time which we would have spent for one-to-one discussion and talking and analysis. So at the moment, we're focusing on analyzing scores, collaborations with composers. So, I mean, one of the things I've been very energetic about is creating opportunities for the conductors to work with composers. I know it's such an essential part of what a conductor should be doing. Just to kind of guide the conductor into asking the right questions, because I've been in sessions where the conductor has tried to tell the composer how to compose. And that's, and that's when you say, no, you did not try to tell the composer how to do their job in the same way as the composer is not going to tell you as a conductor how to conduct their music. I would also say that conducting in silence, so without an ensemble, but just literally conducting to a screen is amazingly revealing. And I've been impressed by how valuable it is. And I mean, last week we are having the auditions for next year's new conductors. And we've done the first round entirely online. And unfortunately, we've decided we're going to have to do the final round online as well. But really, we're sort of, we've asked the conductors to prepare the first movement of Beethoven's Second Symphony. And so they conducted the first 3 minutes or so in silence. And then the three conducting professors worked with each of them for 5 minutes each. So one applicant would have had the three professors working with them for 5 minutes each. And, I didn't miss the orchestra. This is what's so strange. It's like there's nothing to get in between the conductor and the music. Now, I know, obviously, conducting is about interaction. It's about listening and enabling and providing us the space for the orchestra to play their best. But when you're really working away from an orchestra, it's like putting the conductor's intentions under a microscope. And because every single movement you make has to have some kind of reason behind it or express some intention. And it's quite good because, there are a lot of lazy conductors who hide behind a good orchestra, who you get a great orchestra and you can have a monkey conducting them and they'll still sound good. But,
like Toby, I'm sure you've heard about the Orpheus Orchestra here in New York. I attended a lot of concerts to them because they're actually playing without the conductor. To
this, I mean, and obviously they're such a great orchestra, amazing. It probably takes more rehearsal time. So there is also that element of the fact that without a conductor, it takes longer. Somebody has to take responsibility for ultimate artistic responsibility, which in this case would fall to the concertmaster or
first violinist. Yes, first violinist.
Yes. But that's exactly what happened in Mozart's day. And I find this really interesting because when Mozart premiered, for example, Don Giovanni, he was sitting at the keyboard, back to the stage, and you had the concertmaster, no conductor. So you had this situation that by dual leadership, by Mozart directing from the keyboard and having a good relationship with the concertmaster, you could direct these really complicated, accompanied recitatives and big ensembles and everything, and they didn't have a conductor. And I think it's something conductors need to remember that we're not always needed. And when you think of some of the great performances by somebody like Claudio Abbado, and especially when he was really in his last years, and there's some videos of him conducting Bach with his Camerata Mozart, and he's just standing there sharing the music. He's not conducting, but he's just somehow making it happen without getting in the way. It's just one of those things. He doesn't need to create every single note, but he just does something just to create that final moment of magic, that extra ingredient which somebody else can bring.
Toby, I'm thinking very much as the current situation might change also might actually extend also our imagination, because when you mention about this silent kind of sessions, it is working about our imagination. Composers mostly are working in silence. We can hear, you see the score, we hear it, right? But the conductors also actually, we have to find also positive
Definitely.
points of
And,
that.
you know, funny enough, one of the most eye-opening conducting classes I ever had when I was a student was with a conductor I admire massively, Mark Wigglesworth, British conductor. And he didn't want any pianists. He said, I want them to conduct in silence.
Yes.
And I'd, you know, and until that moment, I had only ever conducted with an ensemble or with pianos. And I had to conduct, you know, Tristan Prelude in silence.
In silence.
And he would say, hang on, why did you ignore the double basses? Or you know, where is that phrase going? What's the meaning of that phrase? And as you're saying, it forces you to question why the composer wrote every single note, because it, you know, the fact that the double basses come in at that moment, it changes. It's not just an instrument playing; it changes the whole sonor. You know, the whole scope of the sonority, gives it a whole different emotional dimension, and yeah, and that was pre-COVID or anything. That was like 20 years ago or something.
But have you also analyzed maybe some works by Chopin with your student? Even if he didn't conduct much, I'm asking why, because we have the Chopin&Friends festival. And even if he didn't compose much for the orchestra, we know he mostly composed for the piano, but we have these concertos. And those are concertos where you have to deal with timing and the relation between the soloist and the orchestra. So are you also doing works out of the like a classical conducting repertoire with your students?
Well, you know what? I mean, you know, the second movement of the first concerto, I mean, it should be basically be compulsory for any conducting student, because it's one of the hardest things to accompany there is, because it's like accompanying an aria by Bellini, but 10 times more difficult, because you have so much more flexibility and
ornaments which are out of ornaments.
Yeah, it's so important.
So do you also show your students sometimes this example for conducting?
Well, I've only been at the Royal College for 1 year, so and most of that time has been in lockdown, so I haven't yet managed to do that. Okay, but it's definitely something I would do. And I before I became a conductor, well, I decided I wanted to be a conductor aged about 19.
So that was pianist.
Before that, I was a pianist, and piano is my main instrument, and Chopin is probably, yeah, up there with my favorite composers.
So you played a lot of Chopin, right?
Well, I used to. I don't practice enough now. My technique is, I can play the slow ones, but I've lost my technique now as to do what I used to be able to do. But the combination of melancholy and passion and intimacy, I think Chopin is just so one of the absolute greatest composers, and it's a shame, you know, the only orchestral stuff we get is I don't know, what's the ballet they made his music, they used his preludes.
Piano concertos, yes. And many conductors, even Polish conductors, did orchestration of some of his preludes, these tiny works like E minor or A major. But honestly, always it is not like a real original version on the piano, because sometimes you have to deal a lot with those orchestration with the pedals, right, the sonorities, which are sometimes hard to get on the orchestra. But you know, I'm just thinking, for Chopin probably was very difficult to write music for orchestra with such a huge rubato, with so many changes. To notate that with young musician is easier to do. And I think personally, I don't know if you agree, you know, the Polish music like Lutosławski, Alatoris, when he also is working on this change of tempos in music and the multi-tempos kind of rubato extension. So I think it gave him more freedom in kind of writing, because when you have bar lines, then and you have to always, it's very difficult with this tempo rubato go so far. It's possible, right? So I think maybe Lutosławski was actually extension also of the way of thinking of Chopin, of this pianistic thinking of the rubato, but for orchestra. And Chopin had difficulties probably dealing with this aspect in the orchestral music. I don't know, what do you think about this?
I think you're probably very right. I love Lutosławski, and I need to go away and think about this a little bit more. I mean, the other problem with Chopin is also that orchestras don't enjoy playing it, which is an awful thing to say, because it's, you know, it's not the most inspiring perfectly written orchestral part.
A lot of strings most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a bit thick but you know, the recording I grew up with was Murray Pariah.
Toby, so that's great. We are talking about the music now, and tell me also about the orchestra's life. Generally in England, also there's so many wonderful orchestras, there's also national orchestras, but also how are they doing during this current time of pandemic? How is the situation with them, and how is the future? And what is your maybe reflection about that?
Good. That is a very difficult question.
I know it's very difficult.
I'm trying to stay positive and to keep telling myself that, you know, this pandemic will be over and things will return to normal. But I'm very worried that that's me being overly optimistic, because, you know, the orchestras are really struggling just to stay solvent, and because there's no money coming in, and you know, we don't have the subsidies here on the same level that they do in Germany, for example. I know it must be very difficult in the States as well, where you're relying on private
orchestra. Yeah.
I mean, think of the Met, you know, with 2 years with them not playing, basically.
Right. Or New Philharmonics, the same, you know.
So it's very, very worrying. And on the one hand, it's, you know, for the brave people who can find a new way forward out of this, it's an opportunity. So, I mean, one thing I'm doing, for example, is setting up a new orchestra, small orchestra called Sinfonia 1, which is actually, I thought of pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic, it's even more appropriate. And but for the big orchestras, I mean, I can't tell you how they're going to come out of this. I just know that they're really, really worried, because, you know, where is the money going to come from? They're not hiring anybody. So, and the people I worry about most, in a sense, is the people who are at music college at the moment. They don't have anything to go on to. So, you know, normally you'd leave music college and you'd do all the rounds of auditions, and you'd hopefully get a position in your first position in an orchestra and work your way up. But most of the orchestras have stopped hiring, because, you know, they have government money to get them through, you know, the present crisis. But when will the audiences start coming back? When will audiences feel safe to come back to concert halls?
But orchestras in England, are they funded by the government, or they are maybe private? How is the system in England?
It's kind of half and half. So most orchestras have a relatively, by European standards, a rather small subsidy, which is topped up by private sponsorship or corporate sponsorship. So I would say it's kind of 50-50.
Okay.
I mean, with the BBC orchestras, that's different. So orchestras, which are basically radio orchestras, they're funded directly by the BBC. But then again, we now have the situation that with Netflix and all the other, you know, there's a move for the license fee, so people pay the BBC a license, you know, £10 a month, whatever, to be able to access BBC Radio, BBC TV, and BBC online, you know, website streaming. And if they get rid of that and go to a on-demand service only, so you just pay to watch what you want to, then immediately there's going to be a problem that the BBC orchestra in London, in Wales, in Scotland, all of these are in Manchester, you know, these are all going to be under threat, because how is the BBC going to be able to afford to keep the radio orchestras going?
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm afraid very, very worrying times ahead. And of course, on top of that, we've got Brexit. So
Brexit. Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's a double whammy, you know, COVID and Brexit. And, you know, and already I have friends of mine who were very far along the process of getting jobs in Spain, for example. No longer is possible because they can't get the visa they need. And I have friends who were supposed to be doing concerts in Europe having to cancel because for the fee they were going to be paid for that concert, the cost of the paperwork and the visa is more.
Are the orchestras in England now having some online concerts? I don't know. I would love to know.
The orchestras which basically have funding anyway, let's imagine the money comes from the Arts Council, so that's secured, then yes, they have the funds to do streaming. Okay. I think we all know that streaming will not earn a lot of money. I mean, people don't pay a lot of money.
That's right.
To watch streamed content. They'll watch it if it's free, but if you have to pay, I mean, the Royal Opera House streamed 3 concerts in the first lockdown. The first one was free, and I think had a couple of 100,000 people watching. The second and the third ones you had to pay, and I think the viewing figures were down to sort of a couple of thousand. It was a big difference. I'm not 100% sure about those figures, so I don't take that as gospel truth. But I know that the viewing figures were significantly lower. So it doesn't really substitute having a live audience.
It doesn't.
But the London Symphony Orchestra, for example, has been doing amazing live stream performances with Simon Rattle and other conductors. And Simon Rattle has been amazing because he just knows what the right things to do are at the right moment, you know, and he's so inspiring. And we're going to lose him because he's not going to stay in Britain after 2022. And that's I think it's partly Brexit, but it's also family reasons. And so the BBC orchestras are carrying on doing some streamed content. The opera houses are doing a small amount of streamed content. There are some smaller orchestras. I mean, Aurora Orchestra is very exciting British orchestra. Probably most famous, although it's not, you know, it's not the way they started, but they've been very famous recently for performing from memory. So they did Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique, you know, all from memory.
That's
Beethoven.
new. That's unique.
Really unique thing to do. And so they've been creating a real waves about, you know, how does it make it more spontaneous by not having music in front of you? Our idea is a lot about what can be done online in terms of content, and you know, nothing's more boring. I don't know if you agree with me, but for example, I'm never a big fan of watching opera, and I shouldn't say this. I'm watching.
You mean watching
like opera on video?
On videos? Oh, why? Yeah.
I just don't like it because I miss out.
Oh.
I don't like to be told who to look at when. I don't want to be told I need to look at that singer at that moment because I want to see the whole stage. But can you imagine anything more boring than 3 hours of just a single static camera? You know, so what are you going to do? But you know, I think it's a matter of imagination, and somebody, you know, there are people out there who are absolutely brilliant and can make, I won't say interactive, but totally engaging online content, which is really valuable. And I hope we won't lose it, that when we do go back to doing concerts in person, that actually what we've learned about online content will be something which adds to what we do. That, let's say in the run up to a concert, we'll have a number of online events which connect to the concert, and we'll be able to live stream our concerts as well. But we just need to make sure that the audiences don't stay at home because they'd actually rather sit on the sofa watching a concert than be in the concert hall and, you know, literally feeling the vibrations in the ground of the orchestra, which is, you know, when you take a child to see an orchestra for the first time and you see the expression on their face, you know, just the pure sonic experience.
The sound of the double bass is
nothing. And also, you know, think how much time we listen to music on our phone, you know, and we're used to these I mean, the sound is pretty good for a tiny machine, but it's nothing, you know, it's nothing. It's because it doesn't have the, you know, I'm not a sound engineer.
Of course. It's not never the same, you know. But you know, Toby, maybe also last thing that we can mention, because you mentioned operas, I guess, and this topic, and I also read that you have this in Vienna, this Vienna Opera Academy, and I actually read in the internet that it happened last year.
Yeah.
So that was very surprising. And tell me, how did it happen?
It was, you know, I was amazed it happened. And so a great friend of mine is a Mexican tenor called Jesus Leon. We've worked together. We made a CD together with the Liverpool Philharmonic about 5-6 years ago. And his dream has actually always been to set up an opera academy. And he lives in Vienna. Okay. So 2 years ago, we did the first Vienna Opera Academy, which was a very small, very nice and very successful. And it set the ground for what we were going to develop things into. And then last year,
2020, right? Last year.
2020, yeah, 2020. We were planning to do Don Giovanni. At the beginning of January, we had selected all of our students. This is a student academy. And we'd sent out invitations to our first choices. And then COVID happened, lockdown happened. By the time we got to July, which was when the academy was happening, lockdown had been lifted. So literally one day before the academy started was the first day I was allowed to travel to Vienna.
Wow.
So I was on the flight, made it there. We had a totally different cast of students who took part. And this was partly thanks to Jesus Leon's energy, that he basically found lots of singers who lived in Austria, in Slovakia, and nearby countries in Germany, who could travel relatively easily. And then we had very strict rules about, obviously, social distancing, remaining at 2 meters. And we were able to do, this 3-week academy, which was basically 2 weeks of intense rehearsal and then a week with the orchestra. And we did performances. But I would say that the rules in Vienna or in Austria were a lot more relaxed than in Britain. And I'm sure a lot more relaxed than in the States as well. That there was only 1 meter between audience members, for example. So we could have quite a big audience. And actually, even between singers, I think it only needed to be 1 meter. So yes, it was.
That's congratulations! That's a huge achievement that it happened, and a great luck. Good, it was.
It was great luck, because actually the day before the final performance, the barriers went up again, and that was when I knew I had to quarantine when I went back to the UK. So I just slipped in at the right moment. I was very, very lucky, and.
Yes.
Yeah, to be conducting Don Giovanni in those times was an extraordinary privilege.
Yes, of course, Don Giovanni is such a master. One of my favorite opera ever, actually. Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
This year we're going to do Così fan tutte.
Also Mozart, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Conducting, and I'm just thinking, if you would like us maybe to listen of your opera or conducting excerpt, maybe sample, or maybe some of your orchestral.
All the best. I would probably like to share something which I did during lockdown.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so I mentioned I did this concert for charity. And,
yes.
One of the things we had, so we did, there's the Sinfonia from Handel's Messiah. And there's also Beethoven Romance, which number 2, which I included, which is for violin and small orchestra. And I included it because of last year being Beethoven year.
That's right.
And so I could very happily share that with you, because it shows the amazing stage of the London Coliseum, which is home to English National Opera. And that's where I had a fellowship. And so the place means a huge amount to me emotionally.
So maybe Beethoven, because Beethoven year, and actually I have to tell you, it was very sad because it was very neglected, because it was such a big anniversary, but most of the concerts were canceled, some only postponed, And it was supposed to be a great big year, Beethoven year, but.
Exactly. So we have this, and you'll hear though that everything is slower than. Normally I would do it more flowing. Okay. And everything just sometimes you have to make a judgment that in this situation, in this moment, this feels right. And if I was making a CD of that piece, I wouldn't want it at that speed. But at that moment, in that big space, with us here not being able to hear each other, it felt like the right. It's very strange. I'm obsessed with tempo. Reading huge amounts about Mozart's tempo system, and Beethoven. Obviously, Beethoven, his metronome is a huge conversation about, and he knew the tempi he wanted, and so as somebody who's always been going on, especially to my students, that tempi, there are very few slow tempi in classical music. Andante is going, even adagio is not that slow. When lento is slow, but adagio is not that, and especially if it's alla breve. So I'm always saying that it has to be flow, that has to be direction. But the danger with social distancing is that everyone is waiting for each other, which is why you get this slowness, which is dangerous, because you never want to have a performance which doesn't have direction.
It's like Beckett waiting for Godot.
Exactly.
Always waiting, and it never happens,
Yeah.
And finally, it never happens, but it's just waiting and waiting. So there is always expectation, which is attention in music, but it's not always what we actually need. So that would be great if we hear this. I think this Beethoven would be a great choice.
I'd be delighted. Exactly. It was violinist is Shlomy Dobrinsky, who was going to be leading a concert I was doing, and that concert was cancelled. And the
cancelled.
orchestra, I should have said, the orchestra is members of the Orion Orchestra, which is the orchestra you mentioned earlier, it's an orchestra which I founded in 2005. And the aim of the orchestra was to support and give opportunities to the most talented young musicians leaving music college in the kind of, the period between music college and their professional careers. So it was an orchestra which always changed personnel, which in one sense was a strength and in other sense is a weakness, because it means that you can't build up that cohesive sense of personality which an orchestra has when they've been playing together for many, a long period of time. Correct. And in fact, we're now on the search for a new artistic director, because my successor is now moving on to other projects. So yes, a new artistic director to come.
I wish you for this year, Toby, that you will find a great artistic director, and also that the concert life will come back. And I wish that orchestral life, will be even stronger, after this experience, because maybe we as an audience, actually, we will actually understand better the importance of the real music and of the also orchestras, of the huge group of musicians playing. So maybe they'll be also positive. I hope the situation will soon really get better, and I hope you will come back also to real teaching. I wish you all the best from our also festival, from our new dance and arts innovations, a lot of creativity, a lot of new ideas. And thank you very much that you share with us all of these ideas and all of this, your reflections. And it also brings another impact to our discussions. So all the best, Toby, for your career. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Jakub. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Have a great 2021 and happy Chinese New Year.
And to you.
So, bye-bye. you.